Happy New Year. Happy New Year 2025, everybody. Welcome, welcome. So glad that you're here. First session of the BraveMaker Mastermind and Support Group. Really glad that you could join us today. We're going to get right to it. I know we have some guests today that are joining too. So if it's your first time, really glad that you're here. My name is Tony Gapistone. I'm the founder and executive director of BraveMaker. And we've been doing this support group, basically, is what we call it, for professional development for makers of all kinds for been our seventh month now. And Brave Maker has been in existence since 2018. And we started this as a way, obviously, to facilitate connections and collaborations for makers, but we also use this to help raise funds for our film festival, which is in July. And if you are a filmmaker, we encourage you to go to Film Freeway and look at the opportunity to submit your films. We're very excited for year seven, and we're hoping, we're knowing it's going to happen regardless of all the sponsorships that are challenging. We're going to make it happen in creative ways, as filmmakers often do. And today we're going to talk to a producer who I got to meet a couple years ago, which is really cool, on our podcast, our Brave Maker podcast that we do every week. So let me welcome and bring to the front Mike Lizard.
Hello, thanks, Tony.
I'm Mike. So
I
y'all need to know Mike is actually in the studio today, sound designing his new film called Blue Moon. And we'll talk about that today. So thanks for squeezing us in. I really appreciate it.
Sure. I'm just in this like dark, shadowy environment where like sound editors live, so they gave me a little room here I could use. If you hear some thuds later, they're actually doing another film too here, and it's like a loud sci-fi type thing. So
Are they doing Foley and stuff or what?
I don't know. I think they're just checking the sound on it.
Okay, that's great.
Yeah.
Well, let's start off. I was going through, so we got to talk like 3 years ago, right when you were doing Hitman, like in post, and you had just come out with Apollo 10 and a half, which we met through some mutual connections, Jessica Cohen, who was in it. And you had this quote in our podcast a few years ago. It says, "You don't bring problems to the director. Part of the producer's job is to fix whatever problems arise." And I love that. And just kind of wanted to start there and just talk about your perspective on producing, because, being a producer is very elusive. Well, people always ask, what does a producer do? And everybody says you do it all. But, for you in your work, how do you talk about it?
Well, I think the easiest way to describe it as a producer or a team of producers, a small team of producers, is bottom line responsible for the film happening and being successfully delivered. And so there are a lot of different roles that can entail. But one of the most, just important things is it's sort of like the buck stops here, you know,
Mm-hmm.
ultimately. And you work with a director like Richard Linklater, then arguably the buck probably stops over with him. And I'm more like a lieutenant. But that's part of your job, and so that may entail different aspects depending on the project. Like normally, I would be, for instance, there every day on set. But Richard recently did a film in France in French. I don't speak French. There was a whole
Mm-hmm.
team of people over there that worked together all the time. So it wasn't clear, like on a daily basis, what my usefulness and cost that would entail would be.
Mm-hmm.
So you kind of have to make the decisions on what the specific project is and what its very specific needs are.
So you do a lot of support and partnership with Richard Linklater, which is huge, and he keeps very busy. It sounds like he keeps you very busy on things. So there's a bunch of films we can talk about. We talked about Apollo 10 and a half at length last time I got to meet you, but how about Hitman? Because that's been the talk of the town, it seems like. And, I saw Glenn Powell last night as I was watching the
Yeah.
Globes. He got nominated for Best Actor, which is super cool. But let's talk about that, and slightly based on a true story, and kind of what your work looked like on that film. Like, what kind of things day to day were you doing with, working with Glenn and working with Richard?
Yeah, so I remember it distinctly because I was lounging around at Barton Springs, which is this natural swimming hole pool in the middle of Austin. And I don't normally take calls while I'm there, but Richard called me. And so I was like, oh, I should probably take this. And he was asking me about something else, this project that we'll probably talk about a little bit. Merrily we roll along, and then he said, "Oh yeah, yeah, and have I sent you the script that Glenn and I are working on, Hitman? Are you familiar with that story, Skip Hollandsworth?" And I was familiar with the article. It'd been talked about becoming a film for a while. No one could really figure out how to make it work. And I said, "Yeah, yeah, yeah, send it to me." And so he sent it to me. I read it. We all did a call and talked about, what was working for me, what I had questions about, and we just kind of took off from there. And that's sort of the initial thing is like, what's the material? You know, does it? A lot of times when you're the writers, you can't see certain holes that are in the material that are obvious to other readers. Things that aren't making sense to me as a reader. But the script was amazing from the get go, and it only got better and better and better as the process went on. And then it was initially set in Houston. The true story that happened was in Houston. It's based on a Texas Monthly article by Skip Hollandsworth. And so our intent was to shoot it there. And so we began scouting locations and things. And we wanted this to happen like in the fall of 22. It eventually happened in the fall of 23. And that's how these things work. You have to be
Mhm.
super patient. And but the state of Texas at that time had no incentive money whatsoever. And the offer that we got to make the film, like our net budget, um, we felt needed additional money. And so they said, well, you could take it somewhere else and make it. And, the incentive money would be an additional to the budget. And the place we settled on was New Orleans because it's also a big Gulf Coast city, a lot of crime. It couldn't be the movie based on its premise couldn't be set in too small of a place. It had to be the type of place that if you see an arrest happening on the corner, you kind of go, "Oh, I wonder what's going on over there," and you move on. It's not the talk of the town. And New Orleans fit that perfectly. And even the first person that tries to solicit a hit from him, and he's a fake hitman, by the way, he's working for the police. That person is an offshore oil worker when it was a Houston set script. He's an offshore oil worker when it's set in New Orleans because those people, sort of cross over. But we did do a lot to New Orleans eyes, the language, and talk about pig slop and Opelousas and all this kind of stuff. That just spiced it with the flavor of New Orleans. And all those places we shot were all, local functioning businesses there. We shot it all on location.
I loved it. It was so fun. And coming out on Netflix, can you talk a little bit about how that worked for you all? Did you have you did South by, I think, was your premiere, right? Is that right? Or where was the premiere?
No, that was Apollo 10 and a half premiered at South by. Hitman premiered in Venice,
Okay.
the Venice Film Festival, and then moved to North America at Toronto. And we did quite a tour. We also did the New York Film Festival. We eventually did Sundance because the strike had ended and some of the actors could attend. They couldn't attend the premiere, which was just, in my opinion, kind of ridiculous. It was a finished film. I didn't
Mm-hmm.
know
Mm-hmm.
what they're supposed to be protesting about that, but because it's unfortunate for them to not be able to have those red carpet moments and
Yeah.
everything. But so that so we had shopped it to Netflix originally as a script, and they looked at it for a while and decided not to do it. We had also shopped it to Apple TV. They seemed very interested, and then ultimately decided not to do it again. Patience is a virtue. And then we were offered AGC Studios offered to independently finance it and then sell the movie. And that's what happened. And so they gave us our net budget. We were able to supplement that with money from New Orleans, from the Louisiana tax incentive. And then after it premiered at Venice and Toronto, we sold it to Netflix. So that actually probably worked out better
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
in the long run, but you can't predict what's going to happen. You have no idea.
Yeah. I definitely love and want to talk some about this because we have, filmmakers of all kinds who are on the call today. And I did have a text from Olga, who usually attends and she runs all of our press and email communications. And she said, I can't make it today because she's on set, but she asked me if I could ask you this. Can you talk about your perspective on SAG versus non-SAG from a producer's perspective, your main pros and go-to thoughts and best practices for working with actors? I'm assuming all of the work you're doing is going to be SAG work. Is that true?
Yes.
Yeah. Can you talk about, are you the person or do you have another producer who's doing all of the SAG communications, and any thoughts you want to say kind of high level on working with SAG and what that looks like?
Yeah, like for instance, on Hitman, Jenny Wieland, who is our line producer and has served as an accountant on other projects, she was the one dealing specifically with SAG. The paperwork is a bit onerous. The
Yeah.
rules compared to other unions, I find more flexible. I think that SAG is willing to work with the budget that you have. And they have a very tiered system so that you're not overcharging, the rates for a very, very low budget. I think they even have a micro budget level.
Hmm. Hmm.
And because they want their actors acting. And so they don't want to be an impediment to that. And so I find them relatively painless to deal with. You do have to put up a bond to prove that you can pay all these
Hmm.
actors. And so that makes it very expensive because you
Yeah.
essentially have to put up this bond that proves you can pay them and then get the
Yep.
bond back later.
That's right.
And so that you know just financially is a
Hmm.
challenge for certain films. And then and there's certain rules that you have to be very aware of how many, if the person, it's a scheduling thing, right? So there's rules about, well, if this person is working this day and then has 2 days off and then another day of actual acting, they need to
Hmm.
be paid and for those days in between.
Hmm.
And so you work with the assistant director who's really in charge of this process to make sure that you're as tightly scheduling all of those actors as you can so that they don't have too much downtime where you're
Hmm.
paying them for not working. And with Hitman, that was a bit of a challenge because we had a number of actors, right? We had all the people who have to solicit the hits from him. All of them have to really pop
Hmm.
as characters and be the right person for that role. Thankfully, New Orleans is full of actors, and we were able to get a lot of those people locally. And your rates are different if it's local versus bringing someone in. And and so I think that it's always challenging. All dealing with a union project um, is always going to be challenging coming out of the indie world because there are a lot of rules that you have to follow, and you're dealing with entities that are used to people trying to screw them. So even though you might think, well, we're doing this right and we're doing
Yeah.
it this way or whatever, the rules that they have are there for a reason.
Yeah.
They've developed those rules over time to protect themselves and the people they represent. And so while it may not suit your project exactly, though, you have to be aware of that. And if there's leeway there that you can get, that's great. But a lot of times there isn't. And so people have to be really careful if you want, for instance, as some of you may know, if you want a big name actor in your movie
Hmm.
and that person agrees to do it, even if it's a short film, that and they're a SAG member, that becomes a SAG project. And
Hmm.
everyone who is in the movie, even if they aren't a SAG member, falls under those rules. And so what I tell people is you should be blessed that a big name actor has agreed to do your movie. And this
But
is the cost that comes along with
yeah,
it.
well, even in like non big name actors, right? I know some of the people on this film I know specifically have done some shorts, as I have done a short and a feature with some SAG actors. And, it really does throw a little bit of a wrench in the process and in the paperwork. And you really have to be ready for that. And I wanted to kind of call back to you said the bond when I did my first feature film, Last Chance Charlene, I wasn't aware of that. And like, you have to pay all this upfront money. I thought, okay, cool. That money goes into whatever account, and then you're going to pay the actors. Like, no, you have to, that money just sits there to basically prove that you can actually have the money. So I had to give up like a percentage of my budget, which I was like, and then have the faith to believe I was going to raise the other money to be able to pay. And then I think I had to wait like 3 or 4 months to get that money back. It is kind of a wild process. So
Yeah.
it is something to keep in mind, you all, as you're raising your money for your budgets, even the micro budget, contracts. It's a lot of money that you have to build into that budget. Would you say anything else about building a budget? Many of us are on the micro budget level and we want to grow and raise up to higher budgets. But would you say, as a producer, things that are often forgot in building a budget that filmmakers should be aware of?
Oh gosh, yeah, yeah. It happens all the time,
Uh-huh.
and one of the things is working very closely with your director to find out exactly how they want to shoot this movie. Richard Linklater likes a lot of cranes. They're not big cranes. There's not a lot of swooping shots. There are a few of those, but there's a lot of just you can have these smaller cranes that can move around and track, an actor as they're moving, as they're walking. It's in lieu of a steady cam sometimes,
Mm.
and it just really depends on the setup and where you are, which is better. So you really have to, if you're going to drill down into your budget, you need to know like how many steady cam shots do we plan? How many days do we need the crane? When are days we don't need those things? Um, and post production, even it's just like there's all of these crazy little deliverables at the
Mm.
end that no one specifically budgets for.
Mhm.
I'm going to make sure it happens the next time because it's like
Yeah.
you have to provide all of this information to your distributor so that they can translate the film into other languages, so that they can close caption the
Yep.
film and all that kind of stuff. And that's a whole laborious process.
Yeah.
And so you have to, unless you're willing to work for hours and hours and hours doing these tasks, then you have to farm them out, and it costs money to send them to these services. So there's a lot of stuff. I would also recommend getting with an experienced post person to
Mm.
make sure that you're allowing enough money in your editing and post budget, because there's a whole bunch of little things that add up really quick.
Mm-hmm.
I have this debate with like department heads all the time. They'll say, it's only $500. It's only $1,000. And I'm like, well,
That
where
adds
is
up.
that coming from exactly? Since I don't
Yeah.
have an ATM in my office, like I have to pull that from somewhere. And so if I can't walk down the hall to the costumes department and say, hey, we're going to cut your budget by $1,000 because art department needs $1,000. Like you have to work with each of these department heads to make sure they're comfortable with their budget, knowing that they're going to come back to you later and ask for more no matter what. um, and so I think the most important thing is working with the director to figure out exactly how this is going to be shot and what they're imagining in their head. And then working with all the departments, the art department, costume department, et cetera, to make sure that they feel comfortable with the number of staff they're being asked for. They're going to ask, like, how many extras do we see in this scene? It's a
Mm-hmm.
period piece. It's 1943. There's this big party. That's a
Mm-hmm.
lot of people to costume. It's a lot of people to do their hair.
Yeah.
They're going to need more people on those days. So all that stuff, to really budget a movie, you have to know exactly the movie you're making.
That's good. Having those conversations and communication, and just thinking about your career, Mike. You've done a really, documentary. You did this really cool rotoscope animation, Apollo 10 and a half. You've got a lot of different experience working in different kind of storytelling spaces, which I think is really cool. I wanted to also just highlight the expectation sometimes that we as filmmakers have. Like it's always good to dream big and hope for all these things, but then when it comes down to reality, is going, what can we actually do? How much money can we actually raise? Now again, some of us on this call, we're doing $5,000 to $10,000 short. Some of us, I know one of our filmmakers is doing one for like 40 right now, which is a pretty big budget for a short. So some people are doing features on that, right? So when it comes to micro budget, filmmaking for this level, now you all, by the way, I love that you're not in LA. You're still in Austin, right?
Oh yeah, yeah,
Yeah. I mean, this is what's great too. Austin is a pretty big filmmaking community, but I like that your example of you can be a filmmaker anywhere, so you don't
yes.
have to be in LA or New York. But what are some things, maybe thinking back 10 years ago when you were starting out, or 20 years ago when you were, doing things differently? What would you say to that emerging filmmaker who's trying to get their shorts off the ground? What are some of the things, like high level, like, okay, one camera, one sound recorder, three out? What would you say for that beginning new, person who's making a film and trying to make it happen?
If you're paying anyone that's on the set, if you're on a really tight micro budget, pay the sound person. You can cut around bad visuals. Movies can be made on iPhones or whatever, but if they sound poorly, they sound
Yep.
cheap,
Yep.
and they sound, like they didn't have enough money to make the movie. And so that goes for a documentary in particular. Like you can cut around problems with the video. You can cut to archival, you can cut to someone else finishing that sentence and whatever. But if you don't have those strong voices
Mm,
that are recorded well, carrying the viewer, the audience through the project,
yeah,
and emotionally connecting with them, then you don't have anything.
yeah.
And unfortunately, because it's considered a visual medium, a lot of filmmakers do not pay attention to how important it is to capture good quality sound. So that would be my first piece of advice. I keep coming back to the second piece of advice, which is to to be patient. And the Buddhists have a saying. I don't know. I'm getting this third hand from a book I read, but it says only press with 10 ounces of pressure.
Mm,
And so you always want to be moving things forward and
mm,
pressing things forward, but you want to be careful to not press too hard and forward because um, with documentary, especially when you walk into the story, you don't know the story yet. You're actually just facilitating the story happening by talking to the people who do know the story, who were there or knew this person that you're documenting or the incident that happened or whatever. And it may take you a while to find those right people because each person you meet changes the story somewhat. And they tell you, who you really need to talk to is so and so. They knew Doc Ellis
mhm,
extremely well, but you wouldn't know that. And so if you looked at the Doc Ellis documentary that we're seeing some of now, and you looked at our list of all the people we wanted to interview at the beginning, and then all the people we did interview at the end, maybe 25% crossover,
mm,
30% crossover, because you're on a journey and you learn as you're going. And so you can't press that forward on some arbitrary deadline you've made for yourself. We have to submit to Sundance in this year or whatever it is. Well, maybe you're not ready and it's the last thing you want to hear. It's
yeah,
the last thing you want to hear. And
yeah.
we were told that with this movie that we were not ready the year before, and we were bullheaded about it and said, "Of course, we can't wait another year." They're like, "Just go do another year and go Sundance." We ended up taking it another year. We made the film really well, and then we got into Sundance.
Mm,
Um, and so, if we had pressed forward, it wouldn't be as good of a film. People still wouldn't be talking about it, and we wouldn't have gotten into Sundance. So you have to you don't know. You just have to make the best possible thing, and don't put so much pressure on yourself that deadlines are important. That's how we make things happen. But you have to be comfortable knowing what's best for the project rather than what you've set in your head is something that's judging yourself. Well, I'm a failure if I haven't made this film by then, or
mm,
my parents don't understand what I'm doing. If I if I take another
mm.
year, they're going to think I'm totally crazy, or whatever it might be. You're always putting pressure on yourself. I to this day do it. We're in this like last week of post on this film right now. I wake up at 6 a.m. when I don't need to get up that early. And I can't get back to sleep because I'm worrying about the things that are happening and how it's all going to come together. So that
the
never
true
ends.
the true producer always thinking about every single element of the film. Now, that's really good. I think we all want to rush it. We all want to have something to show, right? Like so much of the filmmaking journey is like the screening, we think, and the red carpet and the film festival. But nobody. It's like that glacier iceberg metaphor. Nobody sees all the time and work and effort that goes underneath that little bit of tip that sticks out of the water. And I will say too, paying sound is so important. As somebody who watches a lot of films from BraveMaker Film Festival submissions, there are so many great films that just we will pass on or we will rate low because we're rating on all these different, rating on story, we're rating on visuals, but we're also rating on production quality, and sound is part of that, right? And so if they get a low rating in sound, it could bring the average down. And we don't like to take any films that don't rate 7 or above. So that is a big deal. As short, micro budget filmmakers, take that and heed that wisdom, pay the sound person. So thank
Yeah.
you so much for that. And I also say when people submit rough cuts, it can be really rough and we can't see what you see. So
Yeah.
it might benefit you to wait, right?
Yeah. You got to get it to as best possible you can before you make those submissions because most people won't allow you to swap it out later. You'll think, oh, I'll send them a new cut. Imagine if they were doing that with everybody,
Right, right,
it
right,
would be
right.
total madness. Here's another great thing that I learned from a woman I worked with who used to work for South by Southwest for a while is you also are graded on somewhat of a curve with your short, in that the longer your short is, the better it has to be to have any
Mm,
chance. As you can imagine, when they put these shorts programs together, there can be only one longish short in there. And I would say something that's 15 minutes or whatever. You
yeah.
can only have one of those per program. So, say that
Yeah.
South by Southwest has four shorts programs. That means for a film that long, you have to be one of the top four films of that length in the world at that
Yeah.
moment in time to get into that festival. You're going to have a whole lot better chance with an 8 minute short that they can plug into any one of those four programs and it's not messing everything else up. I think they have some standard, at least at that time when she worked there, that like for every minute over 12 minutes, or maybe it was even 10, that has to be twice as good. Like, so for each minute, so by the time you get to something the 15 minutes or over, you have to be just excellent to ever have a chance of getting programmed. And with shorts, that's how your film is going to get seen, is by getting programmed by festivals, you know. So it's really important. If you can make it in 9 minutes and 50 seconds, you're going to have a lot better chance than if it's 12 minutes and 10 seconds. I mean, a much, much better chance.
Mike, I'm going to take this clip and put it on our social media for BraveMaker Film Fest. It's so true. And okay, here's the other thing too, I would say. If you feel like your short needs to be 15 minutes or 20 minutes, go for it, do it. But also know it's going to limit your chances. And that's
Yes.
okay too. Like I make a lot of long shorts. I just put them on our YouTube channel. I don't submit them to the film festivals because I know it, it's not going to benefit me to wait to hear back from all these film festivals, most likely getting rejections because of the length. I want it put out in the world. So you got to figure out what's the right audience for your short. And I think you are hitting it on the head. Shorts are amazing for film festivals. I love a 5 or 6 minute short film. Oh my gosh. And you can program that so many times. You might even get to screen 3 or 4 times at a
Yep.
film festival because it's so short. So that's really great wisdom. Mike, thank you.
Sure.
All right, last thing before we jump into our question and response time from other people. You have two huge projects coming down the pike. One, you're right now you're doing sound for Blue Moon, which is a new film that you've got a killer cast: Margaret Qualley, Ethan Hawke, Andrew Scott. Tell us about that. That's amazing.
Yeah, so it's set in 1943 New York. Again, we did film it in Ireland. It's not set in Ireland, but the few outdoor scenes that we have, that Dublin can sub for New York. And we just built Sardi's restaurant in Ireland, and we did that because they have this incredible incentive program. They have great crew and there, and a lot of local cast for the smaller roles. And it's the story of Lorenz Hart, of the songwriting team Rodgers and Hart in the 1920s and 1930s. They revolutionized the sound of Broadway, made it sound like America, and they were the top songwriting team of that era. Blue Moon, My Funny Valentine, The Lady is a Tramp, etc. And but Rogers got the rights to a play that he wanted to turn into a musical, and Hart hated it. Hart was a very New Yorker. He was an alcoholic. He was a closet homosexual. This was a um, very urban person, and a very troubled person. And he saw this as pablum, and so Rogers got Oscar Hammerstein the second to do it with him instead. That became Oklahoma, which became the biggest musical hit of all time at that time. Still, obviously, a huge hit, and Hart was dead 6 months later. So
Wow.
this film happens at the intersection of all that, where Hart goes to the premiere of Oklahoma. He hates it, and he leaves, but he realizes it's going to be a massive hit. So he leaves to go to the after party early, and starts drinking even though he's not supposed to. And so it's a one night movie where the entire movie after that takes place in Sardi's restaurant at that after
That's
party.
so
And
cool.
it's a breakup movie between him and Rogers, basically.
And Ethan Hawke plays
Ethan
the
Hawke
lead.
plays
So cool.
Prince Hart, and Andrew Scott plays Richard Rogers. And
Awesome.
then Margaret Qualley plays this character that was created solely because of these letters that our screenwriter found, Robert Kaplow, from a young Yale college student to Hart. And it was clear that they had met in person. And so she becomes also a central character in the movie. And then Bobby Cannavale plays Eddie, the bartender, who's one of the other really major role in the film.
And a great example too of a feature film. It sounds like it happens in limited spaces. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, that's great. Okay. Final thing before we jump into questions, you are exhibiting the telltale signs of producers who have to have multiple projects always spinning around. You have Merrily We Roll Along, which is another very aspirational project filming. What's the goal? 12 year? What is it? Like you're
It's
boy
20 years. It's over
20
20.
years. Boy
Yeah.
was Boyhood 12 years? I forget now.
Yes. Yeah,
Boyhood
I
was
was
12.
not a
So you're
producer of
beating
Boyhood,
that.
but
You're beating that and doing a 20-year film. Tell us about that,
yeah,
Merrily.
so it's 9 shoots over 20 years. Thankfully, it's somewhat front loaded and back loaded. Well, I don't know about the fortunately part of back loaded, but fortunately, it's front loaded. So we've already shot 3 of these segments.
Wow.
And it is an adaptation of the Stephen Sondheim musical, Merrily We Roll Along, which had always been a failure on Broadway until just last year, where there was a very successful production of it with Daniel Radcliffe of Harry Potter fame playing one of the main characters. But we have Beanie Feldstein and Ben Platt and Paul Mescal as our core three main characters. And the film takes place, or the play takes place in reverse chronology. You meet them when they're in their 40s and they're jaded or alcoholic or whatever. And then it moves in backwards and you unpeel the onions to see
Mm-hmm.
who they were when they were younger and what their aspirations were. And so, but we don't have the, since we want these people to age naturally, we of course can't shoot it in that order. We have to shoot it in what is essentially the reverse order of how the audience will
Wow.
see it. We've already shot the ending of the film,
Dang.
which is when
That's
they're
cool.
youngest, and it's just the three of them on this rooftop. 1957, they're watching Sputnik, and so it's a huge challenge because
Yeah.
we usually do like 3 day shoots, which takes a significant amount of prep too. We do a day of recording to because it's a musical, so they have earwigs in their ears to let them know when they start singing, but you pre-record the songs as well. And so that's been a challenge. I've never dealt with that before. I'd never even seen a Broadway musical when I started on this a few years ago. Now I've seen a few. And but the logistics of putting together this 3 day shoot are nearly as bad as a feature film, just because we're dealing with very high profile actors. They're coming from different places. We have to make their schedules all work for this tiny little thing. No one's making any money on it.
Yeah.
So it's never going to be their agent or their representative's top priority for them. And so we have to keep, it's like keeping the family together,
Yeah.
basically. And we need everybody, they're signed on to do this, and we need them, to really have a fun time doing it and feel like this is going to be something really special. Because even right now, no one's going to see it for 16 more years.
Uh, when this comes out, this is going to be such a feat. Like it is so inspiring. Like I'm like so impressed, and
It's
I hope,
art for art's sake.
yeah, you all
Okay,
have
it's
good
like,
life insurance policies and protections. So make sure everybody.
oh gosh, yeah, the amount that we have to spend on life insurance over the course of this whole thing is like hundreds of thousands of dollars. So,
All right.
um, but
Well,
it gets more deep as it goes, just like life does.
yeah,
And so it does feel like everyone is really, really, after this third one, especially, like bought into it,
bought in, I'm
you
sure.
know, like, so.
It's yeah, so cool. Okay, let's get to questions, y'all. If you're here for the first time or for the 33rd, as we are doing 32nd, as we're doing this, you can always use the chat, put your questions in there. You can raise your hand, we'll bring you to the forefront. And this is a way for you to connect. Let's try to keep them a couple minutes in length so we can get as many people as possible and introduce yourself and share your question. We'll bring in Kelly and then Becca.
Hi, Michael. Thank you so much for being here. I love so many of your films, and I'm a producer myself, starting out after career flipping from being an aviation accident investigator. So Um, and trying to decide as a producer, like Tony said, you have a lot of projects in the works, and this one going across 20 years sounds amazing, by the way. I can't wait. Um, but how do you select your projects and how do you typically be how are you typically brought into projects?
Um, well, the first project I did, which was the Doc Ellis documentary, I really had this idea. I also had a different career before I started doing this. And I really wanted to be a screenwriter. That's what I thought. But I'd become such a good multitasker, or my brain had become warped by multitasking, I think, that I find it hard. Like I am a good writer and I'm a better editor, probably. I just realized it didn't suit me to be like a writer full time or whatever. And I got this opportunity because I met someone who wanted to make this Doc Ellis documentary. And his friend said, "Oh, Blizzard, he can make stuff happen. You should try to hook up with him or whatever." And that's what happened. And we kind of took off from there. And then, and so I had ideas, of films I wanted to make as well. And but then Richard Linklater, we met through the Austin Film Society, and then he became a big fan of that baseball documentary. He's a former college baseball player himself. And he approached me about the movie that became Apollo 10 and a half because he knew I had grown up in that area of around NASA in the Clear Lake in the Houston area. And it had a lot of documentary style stuff in it, footage in it. And so he basically pitched me on the project and said, I want to do this film about a kid growing up in 1969 Houston. He imagines he's the one landing on the moon. And I said, that sounds great. We should have lunch and talk about it. And we did. And it just kind of took off from there. But then once you do something, then other people start approaching you. Like if you have even one film, does well or whatever, then people start approaching you about their ideas and stuff. And so I've helped a lot of films to get made. And I've been an executive producer on a film, Buck Alamo, that had a great festival run. And so I've also kind of dabbled in these smaller films where my role is maybe more of an advisor,
Mhm.
a consulting producer, an executive producer. And I have another one like that I'm working on right now. It's a woman I met at the Austin Film Festival. She was a semifinalist for scripts. And so I was like, you seem interesting. I love the concept. I'd love to read it. And I really liked
Mm.
it and have been trying to help connect her with people and suggest certain actors and things like that. So after a while, like the work kind of comes to you, but then I also have to remember, like, I have this long list of other stuff I want to do. And the
That's
Richard Link,
yeah, that's
and so I just kind of like, it's like, okay, I'm going to do as many Richard Linklater films as makes sense for me and for him. But then I have to plot the time in between. It's like, how am I moving these other things forward? If it's writing, how much writing am I doing? If it's a documentary, the great thing about documentaries, you can go shoot a little bit, come home, do something else, go shoot a little bit more. That's sort of the great thing about documentaries. It also can be a bad thing because some of them never end up being finished, right? But
Mhm.
so you kind of look for that interstitial time to keep your own sort of passions going.
So,
Awesome.
so
I may
Mike,
have to pick your brain about the NASA connections, and I have a period piece set in 1959, 1960 that has a lot of NASA connections. So
Oh, that's great.
especially
Well,
from
NASA's
the
great to work
past.
with. That
Yeah.
it's all public. So once you're in their system or whatever, they're helping you do the work and find the footage you're looking for and all that great stuff.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
I
thanks,
need
Kelly.
mastiff footage.
Real quick before Kelly goes off, Mike, would you say anything to determine how you say no? Obviously, time is something. Is there some red flags or something you're like, not for me? How do you determine that?
Yeah, that's been something I've really had to work on because, the volume of stuff that comes in is just
Mm,
more. And I have to be able to say sometimes to people, this should happen. This is a movie that should happen. But I'm not probably the person that's best suited towards helping it, and just be kind of honest about that for whatever reason that may be. And also it's just like, if, you know, the more, this happens to Richard Linklater too. People approach him all the time with ideas. Ideas are cheap.
mhm.
Okay. Like everybody has ideas. It's like, show me that you can get that idea from A to C to M or whatever. And then once you have that momentum, people are far more likely to join your project. If you approach me very early in your project, I might be
Mm,
able to give you some advice or something, but I really need to see like how much you can carry that forward. And it's the bandwagon effect, right?
that's
If you
great.
see that someone's doing, you have to go out there and do it for yourself.
Mm,
And when people see that, they're far more likely to join in it than you help thinking that they're that the person, that I'm the answer to your prayers or whatever. That's just not the case, you know?
that's really good, Mike. You want to see momentum. Thank you, Kelly. All
Yeah.
right, let's look at Becca and then Dashel and then Rashmi. Hi, Becca. Welcome. This is Becca's first mastermind, so welcome.
Hey, hopefully you can hear me. Okay.
Yep.
I'm tuning in from work. So hi, Michael. I'm kind of on the other end. I kind of wanted to know your advice for selecting producers. I've written like 4 feature films and I'm just kind of like, now what?
Yeah.
Um,
I think you have to always be looking at what are the films you like, what are the films that are in the wheelhouse of your film. And that's really important for a number of reasons. Because when you're trying to sell the film to anybody, you have to be able to say it's like that. They have to be able to relate it to something. It's like the old, think this, but with a female instead, or whatever it is. Like people have to be able to compartmentalize what it is that you're talking about, and so finding those producers that have done those types of projects, that have helped first time filmmakers, to get a passion project made or whatever, that typically that person specializes in something akin to that. So it's like really knowing them. And so that also when you're contacting that person, you can spark a meaningful conversation with them because you know about them, the work they've done, who you're always know who you're pitching. Because if you can relate with them in some way, like Richard Linklater and I, we talk about sports a lot. So part of our conversations will be like, what's going on with the Astros? Why are they trading? Like, are they going to be rebuilding now or what's going on? And so we've always just had that connection. And we're both these Houston guys. We grew up there. And so that has really solidified our relationship in some ways because, we talk about work, but we also talk about all this other stuff that we have as common interests. Because you're going to be really, you have to be dealing with that person through a lot of difficult decisions. And there's a lot of these companies out there that I feel like seem really shady to me. I'm not sure what they're doing for people. So number one is, what is the track record of that person? And what exactly was their role in that film to make it happen? Because a lot of people really pump up themselves in the film industry. This happens in the music industry. Everything like creative thing is like, oh yes, we can do this and we can do that. Well, show me how you've done that in the past. Make them also work for your job. Like they should want to be. One of the biggest ways is, are they passionate about this? Does it move them?
right.
And that's how you judge whether someone should be in the movie, whether someone should work on the movie. you know so
Okay. Great. Thank you. Yeah, because I'm probably going to just go the independent route and probably direct my first one. And I think people that have kind of heard about it are kind of chiming in like, oh, I want to read it and I want to, and
it's good.
yeah, so it's kind of like, oh, where do I where do I choose? So I guess, kind of checking their track record
Yeah, for sure.
to start. But yeah, yeah, thank you.
And Becca,
Yeah.
that's what this group is for too. So as you get to know everybody in this group, you might be able to find a producer who wants to partner. You're in the Bay Area, living in San Francisco, so everybody should know Becca here, Martinez, and we can support this feature film vision that you have. Glad that you're here, Becca. Thank you. All
Thank you.
right, Dashel, you are up. Although, real quick before Dashel jumps in, I was just thinking about querying producers and filmmakers through IMDb. If you get an IMDb Pro account, you can see, people who have produced similar films that you like and or want to make, and you can find their contact information. And although querying can be a little bit daunting and some people say it doesn't work as much, there is a percentage that you can get into someone's inbox and keep it short. Tell them what you have, give them your log line and your comps, and let them know what you're up to. And you never know how that might go, and especially building relationships on social media. Dashel, what's your question, bud? Good morning.
So I just want to say, hi, I'm Dashiell Meyer, and it's such an honor to meet you. And
Thank
my
you.
question is around what's your storytelling? How do you write your scripts in a very storytelling way? What's your process?
Well, mostly I'm reading the scripts rather than writing them, though I do, edit and make suggestions and things like that. I have a good ear for dialogue that's natural, like how real people talk. I recommend sometimes that people just go out in the community and just you can just tape how people speak, how people have conversations. It's not typically how people write the conversation. Often it's too on the nose. But the most important thing about a script is, do I see a movie in my head when I'm reading it? Like, is it unfolding in my mind as a movie? And that tells me it's a good script. And so there's all these rules that they have about, writing scripts and do this and don't do that. And as if there's some judge down, that's the grammar judge. Know the rules so that you know which rules you're breaking and why you're breaking them. Because it's all about how it reads on the page. For instance, sometimes, there's the subject headings, the scene headings, they moved from the living room to the kitchen. Do we need a different scene heading, or does it flow better to just say they moved into the kitchen? Later, when you're making the film, you're going to put that scene heading kitchen, and that's for the assistant director to know we have now moved into the kitchen. It's a different setup. Camera's going to be placed differently, etc. But for the reader, sometimes it's better to just let it flow, because those scene headings really break it up, if you know what I mean. It becomes really choppy, and you want it to read really well on the page, and you want it to create a movie in the reader's mind, that they see this as very filmic. That's my best answer.
Thanks, Dashel, for being here. All right, Rashmi, you are up. I'm trying to find you. There we go. Here you come.
Hi. Hi, Michael. Thank you for
Hi.
being here. It's such a privilege for Bay Area-based actors. Thank you, Tony, for bringing people to us. I am a actor, writer, producer. I recently finished a SAG film. It's a romantic drama filmed in the Bay Area, and it's highlights domestic violence in the Indian community in the affluent Silicon Valley. And I uh, I have a festival related question, but a comment that people are not only reaching out. My film is not even out yet. I'm submitting to festivals. People are reaching out for what's your next project? Here's my pitch. Here's this, that. And women who have found, South Asian women who are finding about this film through the trailer are reaching out saying, hey, I was in a very toxic relationship. I was in an abusive relationship. So I'm sending them off to websites that are help women. So, and that has already started. The movie's not even out yet. So I feel like my goal or my intention is already in play, which is pretty amazing to bring a light to the situation and have the women find the empowerment that they need. But as I'm submitting to festivals, Austin has like 4 film festivals: Austin International, Austin Festival, Austin Short Fest, etc. So, do you have any strategies, comments, ideas, thoughts about film festival navigation?
Yes, there are if you're trying to sell a feature film, there are not very many festivals where you can sell the film at the festival. You could probably count those on 2 hands in the US. And so, for instance, in Austin at South by Southwest, that's a marketplace. People are buying and selling films. etc. You want to have an agent, sales agent for your film representing you there. But then we have things like the Austin Film Festival, which is primarily a writers conference, but also shows great films because it's, it's a city. It's a pretty big city these days. It's, people want like The Brutalist played at the Austin Film Festival, other films that were about to launch. It's like a launching pad for bigger films and a lot of smaller films that maybe weren't able to get in the South by Southwest or weren't able to get in Sundance like they wanted, and they just want an audience for their film. But so it's really important to know what's your goals, when you're submitting to a festival. Also realize that the first festival that you agree to is going to set the course for your film. You can't premiere at a smaller festival and then think a bigger festival is going to take you on, especially if you're a feature. They will not. They want the film to be a world premiere or a North American premiere or something. And so you really want to set your goal to find the right festival to premiere your film. And then sometimes things, like you said, like people are then interested, you have this stamp of approval already. So it becomes much easier to get into subsequent festivals once you have that premiere. But I've seen people, unfortunately, agree to a festival because it's in their city or something. And then other people like, we can't take it now. Or a sales agent is like, I can't represent that now because I can't premiere it at the festival I think it should premiere at. So you have to be kind of careful about that. With shorts, it's not as important to get a premiere and stuff, but also on your advocacy issue. I mean, you're building your audience through a trailer. So this is a really good sign that when the film comes out, that you're going to spark even more interest. So to really be prepared for that and talk about, here's what I've learned through the process of the nonprofits I think people should contact, or whatever it might be, to sort of like, that's an advantage for your film, that it's focusing on an issue, and that especially if it's an issue that, is underrepresented or, not known enough about. So we have Indie Meme Festival, by the way, which is a South Asian festival in Austin. They play mostly films from India, but they would probably be very interested in a film that was, it's Indian, but it's in the US. So
I submitted to the Austin International Film Festivals, but that's different from Indie Meme, you're saying.
Indie Meme is it's called Indie Meme, yeah. And it's a South Asian based festival. Yeah.
I'll look into it. Thank you.
That's great. That's really good advice, Michael. And Rashmi, yeah, I think just to encourage you, have a one-pager resource sheet or something that you can send off to people, have it on your website. Always be able to, because if you're going to get all these DMs and messages, you can't, respond to them one by one, but you just have this one PDF you can send out. And those organizations you can also partner with to promote the film too. So when you do your film screening, when you do a film screening in Redwood City at BraveMaker, we can have those things available and have them available at the talkback too. So I'm happy to help you with that as well. But thank you. Thank you so much. All right, we have time for one more question. If anybody has, I think Marion, so Joel's in the question box saying,
I had my hand up, but I lost the connection for a second.
All right, cool. We'll get to you, Joel, as well. We have a couple more minutes. Marion, who's in France right now.
I am in an Uber in Paris right now, pulling into my cafe, and I was lucky enough to get your email so I could pop on for the whole meeting, and I really appreciate hearing it. I'll probably listen to it again, Michael. My question was about the scene headings. I heard you say something about they break up the reading, and I'm like, oh God, I've been editing like crazy. It's my first screenplay. I want it to be good next time a producer asks me for it, because I've given it to so many of them, and I don't want it to be anything less than excellent. But I have scene headings to describe, like if they move from another room. Should I be changing the scene so they don't have to move to another room, or what do you suggest?
No, I mean,
merci.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's just like it can get choppy, right? Like if there's four scene heading changes on one page, just the way that Final Draft does that, it bumps down this other, thing. And so it's like you're reading all of this stuff that's not the story, and I'm not saying not to have scene headings, but I do think you should be judicious about it. Sometimes it's easier to basically say, they get up of the couch and move into the kitchen. She grabs something from the fridge. does that need a scene heading that says interior home kitchen now?
Oh, you don't have to do that. You can just say they moved into another room.
Sure. Especially if it's like an open floor plan, especially, I think you can totally get away with that. Again, it's all like, how does it read?
Oh
Like,
God,
does
I'm
it
lucky.
flow?
I'm lucky you were here because I'm doing my final edits and I am going to change a bunch of things tonight when I get home from my date. I swear I'm like
Well,
obsessed with editing right now. I love it.
well, good.
I'm all
Yeah, I think
dressed
it's
up
all
for
like
Paris, but I'm ready
what
for my
flows.
editing. I've been 4 days in there without coming out of my apartment.
Awesome.
I'm seeing some things too where thank you, Marianne, where people are doing mini scene headings. So you don't have to use like interior, condo, kitchen.
Right.
Just put the word kitchen, right? And
Yes,
so
exactly.
that
Yeah,
is
that's
something that I
another
see a
good
lot.
way, especially if it gets montagey,
Yeah.
to just break it up with like these little headings so that you're not, having to just chunk it up so much.
Yep. I like that a lot. Well, we have a couple of minutes left before he's got to go back to Blue Moon, which is exciting. We can say that we saw, this producer of Blue Moon during the sound session with us, which is really, really cool.
You could barely see him because he was in a dark room.
This is very memorable, Mike. Okay, that's what this is important. It's memorable. So I guess last thing, you are meeting a lot of people. It sounds like people are saying to you, "Can you help?" What are some things you would say like green flags in relationship building in this industry, and some things that are red flags, some things we should avoid? From your opinion, because this is about who you get to know and who knows you, and sometimes these things take years. You can't expect overnight or at a festival within 5 minutes to get a producer. But what are some tactics or tips you would say in the relationship building kind of space?
There's an actor here in Austin, Sonny Carl Davis. He's been in a whole bunch of stuff over the years. Great character actor. And he has a saying, it's like, do good work and make friends. It sounds simple, but you are part of this very, very collaborative process. And so, the ability to get along with people, the ability to get along with everybody that you're working with, and not allow things. This is one of the things that producers really have to work on, is over the course of a film, the crew gets factionalized. Certain people kind of support this person, there's cliques or whatever, and you got to try to keep everybody happy and everybody working together. Or if they can't, how can we keep them from having to interact so that they can all do their jobs appropriately? Like, that's a big part of my job. And so I do think that people know what it's like to work with you, and they know whether you're collaborative and you're focusing on the project itself, or you're just focusing on your role in the project because it's about you. You have to sort of sublimate yourself to the larger good here, if you want to call it that, as artists, right? It's a commercial business, but we're just trying to make the best art that we can, and then hope that people like it and it sells. That's the only way I can approach it. So I think, avoiding trying to artificially make things commercial or whatever, and just being the person who just steps up, puts their foot in the door, and just does the work. I mean, that's how I became Richard Linklater's producer. I was not offered the job of producer on Apollo 10 and a half. I just started working on it. And it ended up through a whole series of course of events. I became the producer of that film, and then that went from there. But if I had demanded from the beginning, well, what is my role exactly? Am I going to get to be the producer or whatever? That's stymieing the work, and it's not helpful. And he probably would have said, you don't have enough experience to be the producer, if you're going to put it that way. And so you have to tread carefully, work your way in to the room, and be a good citizen in the room, and be helpful and supportive to others and kind. I mean, it really is just, those things go a long, long way. Because you're going to, projects take multiple years, and then they have a long tail at the end of them. I mean, people are still talking to me about Hitman. To me, Hitman happened
that's
a
been long
long
gone, right?
time ago. And it's had this long, we've shot that in the fall of 2022. So it's been more than 2 years ago. So anyway, that's the best advice I think I can give.
Great advice. Awesome. Thank you so much. And I remember you introduced us to Sonny because he was on one of our podcasts. He was one of your collaborators.
Oh, that's right.
He was on. Yeah. So thank you. Well, this is so great, Michael. I know you got to get back. We're gonna take a quick little photo with everybody. So everybody, look your best here on the count of three. 1, 2, 3. Yeah, awesome. Happy New Year to you, Michael. Thank you so much. We wish you the best on Blue Moon and all the things, and we'll be in touch. Hopefully, we'll see you. I know I'm going to be at South by Southwest, so maybe
Yes,
we'll
I'll be around
intersect.
for sure. Yeah,
Okay.
always
All right.
am.
Thanks,
Okay,
Mike.
thank you
Take
so much, and
care.
good luck to everybody.
You got it. Anybody else
Okay.
who wants to stay on for a few minutes, I want to tell you, isn't that great? So awesome to have that kind of quality and caliber person with us. These are really important ways to make connections in the industry, right? So follow him on his Instagram and, be kind, don't be weird, be encouraging along the way. You never know when you might meet him in person. And this is the second time we've had him in the BraveMaker community. My goal is to